Actually, the leap of faith, to give it the memorable name that Soren Kierkegaard bestowed upon it, is an imposture. As he himself pointed out, it is not a leap that can be made once and for all. It is a leap that has to go on and on being performed in spite of mounting evidence to the contrary. This effort is actually too much for the human mind and leads to delusions and manias. Religion understands perfectly well that the leap is subject to sharply diminishing returns, which is why it often doesn't in fact rely on faith at all, but instead corrupts faith and insults reason.
You are listening to A Leap of Doubt, the podcast that celebrates science, secular humanism, and the courage it takes to embrace an evidence-based life of doubt and questioning. You are listening to episode number 11 of A Leap of Doubt. I'm your host, Nathan Dickey. I am speaking today about exclusivity and cult-like doctrines within the context of religion. Joining me for this episode is special guest Joe Magestro. He's the author of the book Ask an Atheist, What You Should Know When Discussing God and Religion. Welcome, Joe.
Hi, thanks to be here.
Great to have you. In the introduction to this book, you describe yourself as just an average person, your average atheist who enjoys discussing religion with numerous individuals and being a resource for anyone who wishes to open their mind to something new. But you do have a backstory that some might say is not so average. You were actually in the past involved with a fundamentalist, exclusivist Christian church that many would classify as a cult, the Iglesia ni Cristo, or Church of Christ, founded by Felix Malano in 1914 and based in the Philippines. Is this an organization that you yourself would call a cult?
Oh yeah, and don't worry about it, but pronounce Manalo.
Oh, Malano.
Manalo, Manahlo.
Okay.
So, but seriously, don't worry about it. I don't care. It's not like I have a lot of respect for the guy anyway. But yeah, without a doubt, I would definitely consider this a cult. One of their biggest pet peeves, like when they're introducing new members in, is that they actually try to convince you that they're not a cult, which is a big red flag. But
kind of like protesting too much.
Yeah, so like the favorite thing that they'll always do is when you first come into this church, and we could talk more about the specifics of the doctrines and stuff in a bit too, but when you're a newcomer into this church, most likely you'll be involved in what they'll call an evangelical mission, or a local evangelical mission, or a grand evangelical mission, depending on how big of an event they want. And the first thing they typically tell you is, by the way, there's a lot of bad stuff about us written online. Don't look at it. It's calling us a cult. It's all bad stuff, and it's all lies, and it's all propaganda. Just listen to what we say here. And it's weird because, like, why would you? I didn't even bring this up. Why are you bringing this up to me now?
Mm-hmm.
So, but yeah, I would for sure call this thing a cult. They are, at the very least, an incredibly extreme or extremely strict Christian sect, I would say.
Mm-hmm. It almost sounds like they're taking a page out of the Bible, like in the myth of Genesis, with God like saying, "Here's this tree, but don't eat it." Like, here's the internet, but don't look at it.
Yeah,
you
pretty
might
much.
find something bad about us. And as we all know, the internet has been an amazing resource for people finding their way out of groups that claim to have a corner on the truth. The internet has been devastating to churches and sects and cults that claim to have inner knowledge or inner exclusive truth. And I think the emergence of the internet has been terrible for people who claim that sort of thing.
Oh, without a doubt. Especially for this church as well. I mean, a lot of my friends are also like ex-Mormons and Jehovah's Witnesses, and they could probably have similar stories to what I would. But with this church in particular, in the United States, Iglesia ni Cristo is pretty tame. But over in the Philippines, it's actually a lot of tension, and there's a ton of headbutting between them and a lot of the majority of Catholics that are there. since the vast majority of the country is Catholic, to the point where people are being abducted. People were attempted or were almost killed by members of this church for speaking out against it. So these are the kind of things that are actually coming out online in this about this church. So that's why they feel like they have to say it right away that these are all lies made up about it. Because if you just go online and read about it, you'll say, oh, this person had a grenade thrown in his car because he was speaking out against the church. Oh, this was a minister who was ended up kidnapped because he was speaking out against the church. So yeah, these are the kinds of stories that are written about this. So that's why they have to address it right away.
Mm-hmm. So maybe give us a little bit of your background, where you came from, what you're about, and like how you got involved in this church in the first place.
Sure, and I'll explain a little bit what the church is about in this as well. So I actually had no relation to this church the vast majority of my upbringing. I was raised Catholic. However, my mother was pretty secular for the most part, but she still wanted to raise me with those, traditional values, but very progressive. So, I am completely grateful for what she did and how she raised me. I didn't actually get involved with this church until my senior year of high school back in 2010. So, and that's because, cheesy story, but I met someone who was in the church and we fell in love and became little high school sweethearts. So, the big problem with this church, though, was that you could not marry or date outside of this church because it is written within the Bible. I can't remember the exact verse, but it's about being unequally yoked. And they take that to the point where if you're not physically within the church, you cannot be married in the eyes of God, and everything else is an abomination. So it was pretty strict. We had to actually be on the down low and pretty secretive for a while. A lot of my friends who knew me, I'm a very goody two shoe type of person, and I never expected to be the boyfriend in the closet. Literally, I actually had to jump out of the window a couple of times when her parents came home during that same summer. So that was a weird experience for me. But yeah, it was where we were out together. She had to lie to her parents and family that we were ever seeing each other. If she saw someone who was a part of the church when we were maybe at the park or something, she had to duck behind a tree until they left because she could not be seen with someone. So that carried on for a little while. We probably up until my freshman year of college, I think, maybe this summer of that. But we decided where we couldn't do this anymore. We couldn't do the, play secret. So either A, she had to leave the church, or B, I had to join it. Well, she wasn't leaving. So that's where it left me to join it. So I ended up joining it, I think, either in between my freshman and sophomore year in college. And I went through what they call the indoctrinational period, and they don't hide from it. Basically, that means it's a 2-part session where the first part of it is you sit down with a minister. It's like one-on-ones with the minister for 28 lessons, and they go through why they're the true church, why Felix Malano, their founder, was the last true messenger of God, why every other church, especially other Christian churches, are all either of the devil, wicked, or completely misguided and are all going to hell, and why the way we're doing things in INC is the best way according to God and the Bible. So I did all that. After that, I had to go through 6 months of perfect attendance for church, which didn't go too well for me because I wasn't hardcore in it. I was just doing it to be with this girl.
Mm-hmm.
So it actually ended up being around 8 months because they kept restarting me. But with this church, what they mean by attendance is they have church twice a week. And for my locale here in Wisconsin, it was Thursdays and Sundays. So other churches can be almost any other day. They don't really subscribe to an actual day of Sabbath because any day is fine as long as you're making it to service. And when you go to church, you actually have your little name card that you have to flip over, kind of like when you're punching in and out of work. So You'll flip your name card over.
I do remember hearing you on Real Life Beyond Faith talking about that, and I was just taken aback by that. Like this is like punching into work. This is crazy.
Yeah. So every time you would literally flip your name card over, and they have an assigned attendance taker who will check to see who has been there or not. If you couldn't make it to church, that was fine. You just had to make it up that week somewhere else. Well, this church isn't that big. It's about 10 to 15 million maybe worldwide. In Wisconsin here, there's one locale in the entire state. So if I miss church, let's say on a Thursday, I would have to either make it up by going down to Chicago, by going to Minnesota, by going to Iowa that week to make sure I didn't miss that exact lesson from them. And if I did, some type of consequence would happen. Either, like I said, since I was a student for baptism, I would have my indoctrination period either reset or take longer. If I was an officer of the church, I would have my office temporarily revoked, where I couldn't perform anymore for like maybe a week or two. Or if I missed consecutively, I may risk being expelled from the church.
Wow. And this must have some kind of psychological effect on the people who are within the church. Like the whole idea of being so invested that consequences will occur for not attending. So there's it kind of psychologically puts you in a mindset where you're so invested that you can't really afford to question too deeply.
Oh, correct. I always like to say Iglesia ni Cristo members travel well. Kind of like, I don't know if you've ever heard of like good traveling fan bases for sports teams. Very similar with this, where it's quite amazing when I would talk to members of INC and they say, yeah, I'm going to have to make, the drive down to Chicago, which is like a 2.5 hour drive. And they would just say like, it's nothing. Or where they have like regional events or district wide events, either somewhere probably, for us, it'd be called the Northern Midwest District. So it'd either probably be in Chicago, Indiana, maybe sometimes Detroit, Michigan. And yeah, you would just be expected to go all the way over there, wake up at maybe 2 a.m, drive 8 hours to make sure that you're there on time for maybe a special choir rehearsal. And it's pretty much nothing to them because that's all they know. And the idea of missing this is not even an option.
Yeah, what strikes me as ironic about this church, based on my reading of it, is that, as I understand it, members are not allowed to interpret the Bible for themselves. Is that correct? Like, they have to depend on the central administration of the church to receive the official interpretation of Scripture.
Yes, I would say yes and no. From an outsider looking in, yes, that's what it is. They would argue differently. They would basically say, no, read the Bible for yourself, and then it'll show you that we're interpreting it correctly. So they would say what they're doing is based on evidence and reason, even though it's incredibly authoritarian. So
yeah, because the Iglesia ni Cristo are a Protestant offshoot, and they have a very strong anti-Catholic sentiment. So that's why I say it's kind of ironic that to outsiders looking in, it does appear very authoritarian when it comes to scriptural interpretation, and the fact that they even have a central administration that enforces these doctrines and practices.
Correct. And I think the best example I can think of off the top of my head would be whether or not you accept Felix Malano was the last true messenger of God. Because they actually make you take a test at the end of your baptismal period to make sure you understand and fully accept all the teachings. And one of their final questions for you when the ministers will sit you down is, even though Felix Malano is not explicitly written about in the Bible, we believe that he is depicted based on these prophecies. Do you accept that? Now, what's interesting about that is they are all about it has to be written in the Bible or it doesn't count. That's it. End of the day. That's why they take such a hard line against a lot of Catholic teachings, because they're not necessarily biblical teachings. So for them to say that is a big deal. But even then, I can't say no to that answer. Even if I had questions about it, I'd still have to agree with them at the end of the day. Otherwise, I'm not moving on, or I'm not getting baptized, or I would be in trouble one way or another.
So what happens to any member who might disagree with what the central administration says about a specific or given interpretation of scriptures that they put forth?
A lot of it depends on it depends where it is. I mean, here in America, that'll be taken care of mostly on a local level, where obviously if you are caught speaking out against the administration, they're going to bring you in and start talking to you. Not like that they're punishing you yet, but they want to figure out what's going on and why are you disagreeing with this administration. If you continue to disagree with them, something could happen where they'll say maybe you should take some time away from the church, or to figure out where you are, or maybe we should have some more Bible studies so I can tell you exactly why you're wrong in these areas. But if you persist, or if they consider you a danger to those who are also in the church, maybe because you're spreading supposedly bad ideas, that's when they would probably say, we're going to excommunicate.
Interesting. Yeah, so one of the best resources I've come across for anybody interested in kind of getting a full picture of the history and doctrine of the church is a paper written in 2001 in the Journal of the Humanities and Social Sciences of Southeast Asia and Oceania by Robert R. Reed, titled The Iglesia ni Cristo, 1914 to 2000, From Obscure Philippine Faith to Global Belief System. And in this paper, Robert Reed talks about, at some length, the ambition of the church to kind of implement a program of far-reaching evangelism that has no national bounds. How successful have they been? You've talked about how small the church is and how they have very small reach, especially here in America. Is that one of their ambitions and goals to this day that you know of, kind of spreading their religious beliefs in large metropolitan areas?
Yeah, without a doubt. So the reason why I said about 10 to 15 million is because they don't release their official numbers. The best we can do is estimate. What they do instead is they won't say how many members they actually have, but they'll say how many countries they're in. So back when I was there, and it could be more by now, and I'm sure it is, but they would always claim that they were in 96 different countries worldwide, which is so big. And, what an amazing accomplishment that this church could be in 96 countries worldwide. I mean, pales in comparison to almost anything other than the Iglesia ni Cristo. But to them, it was a big deal. So that's what they do. And towards their centennial, which happened in 2014, it was all about propagation. Propagate, bring in fruit to the church, whether that's literally having kids, they'll say that counts as fruit, or bring in Bible students, that counts as fruit, to the point where they're actually telling people, you need to have a fruit coming into the church and we'll mark you down when you do. And if you don't, we have a record of you not bringing someone in. So you're kind of you're failing your duty to the church.
Oh,
so
wow.
They take propagation very seriously, which was always an interesting aspect for me, because they treated it as, well, we need to propagate more because the centennial is coming. And a lot of the people thought when the centennial happened for this church, that was the end of the world. The rapture would happen right after they hit 100. And so I was being told the only reason why they're upping their propagation game so much is because of that. And of course, when the centennial happened, or it didn't happen, they didn't let up. And I brought that up with a couple of people saying, well, if the centennial didn't mean the end of the world, why are we still propagating like the world could end tomorrow? And they said that's just what the administration wants. They need more members of the church.
This is something that strikes me as very interesting for a number of reasons, because with a church that is notable for its exclusivity, and we are the only true church, and everybody else is hellbound. I wonder what their internal reasoning is in trying to spread their message and grow their numbers. Doesn't that introduce the possibility that their corner on the truth becomes diluted to the point where their numbers have grown? Let's say that they're successful. Now what? How do they contain it? How do they maintain control over their doctrine?
Sure. Well, INC is incredibly bureaucratic, where so unlike a lot of Baptist types of churches where one sermon from one church to another could vary widely, every single church preaches the same thing every week, and where every single sermon is basically written in by the central administration, either directly by the executive minister of the church, which is Eduardo V. Manalo, who is the current one right now, or by someone who he has directly appointed and maybe works with. From there on out, they'll distribute whatever the sermon is, and then every church will have to actually follow what the lesson is verbatim, what's written on the page. So when a minister goes off and does his own thing, that's actually pretty uncommon because they don't train their ministers to go off script very often. So when people will try to say, oh no, I like this minister a lot better than this one, I always found it interesting because it was always the same lesson regardless of who was speaking. So whether it's sermons, they'll control it. Whether it's any type of activities, they'll control it. And I would like to say, even though they don't have a ton of people compared to other churches right now, they do have a great hold on what they consider doctrine. And they have a good job at actually relaying their message properly to the members at the bottom of the church.
Okay. I had a thought and I just kind of lost it. I was wondering, does this church have like political ambition? Do they are they fond of a theocracy or anything like that? Anything political in their end game?
Sure. So in the majority of the world, no. Usually it's just as long as church comes first, that's all that matters. However, there have been several instances in the Philippines where the church has been investigated and accused of illegal block voting in the Philippines, supporting one candidate or another, whether it's to further advance, Iglesia ni Cristo's agenda, or it's to stick it out from, whether the Catholic candidate likes them or not. So yeah, in the Philippines, they do try to have a good presence of political power. And that's been disputed whether or not how much power they actually have, or whether or not how much they actually do the block voting issue. But for the rest of the world, it's not too much, as long as, again, keep your membership in the church. That comes first.
Yeah, what are some scandals or controversies that have made their way into the public consciousness in recent years? Anything stand out? Has the general public become aware of any activities that are controversial or scandalous?
Sure.
As a result of their activities, like becoming news.
Sure. Yeah, there's a couple I can think of. So the block voting is definitely one that we just talked about. Another one that happened, maybe it was 2 years ago, I would say, 2016-ish, maybe 2015. I'm not sure. No, I think around 2016. there was an issue of misappropriating church funds for personal use and personal gain of the executive minister. Shocker, right? So, and what was interesting about this was the executive minister was being accused of misappropriating funds by his own mother and his brother. The mother, now, the big thing about the mom is, if you couldn't tell, Felix Malano and Eduardo V. Malano have the same last name. He's the grandson of Felix Malano. It's all based on bloodline, even though they try to say it's an executive position. So the mother, whose name I don't know, was the wife of Iranio G. Malano, which was the son of Felix Malano. So she holds a great standing within the church. Kind of like the first lady of the entire thing. And the brother, if I'm correct, was the lead editor of their propagation magazine, which was Pasuko. And I'm butchering that, so I apologize. But I think it's like Pasugo, which is their personal magazine for the church. So they accused him publicly of coming out with these church funds. Eduardo V. Malano goes on a crazy tyrant and excommunicates them both from the church, accuses anyone else, like any other ministers who were involved in this investigation of him, and basically kicked them out as well, saying that all these people are wicked and evil and they should be shown no mercy and no kindness, and it's a lot for basically, buying private jets and going on luxury trips with church funds. So just stuff like that. And I mean, the guy kicked out his own mother because he was being accused of wrongdoing. So that happened. And I have a couple of friends who are still members of INC who talk to me on a regular basis. And I asked them about this, and they said, yeah, I just heard the sermon about it today, where they just railed against the brother and the mother, who basically, if they ever saw them, you're almost supposed to never show them any politeness at all, because they're the most evil beings in the world trying to take down this administration.
Oh, wow.
So, and then I talked to another one who still believes in it, and I asked her, hey, what do you feel about this? And she said, yeah, I know, I hate it, I'm so angry. And I said, yeah, me too. And then she answers, yeah, I can't believe all those horrible people are trying to take down our minister. I'm like, whoa, you're buying this? And she's like, what do you mean I'm not buying this? So we had a nice conversation about that too. So that was one. The other one that just happened probably less than 6 months ago was the CBC published an article about a former minister who had to actually flee the Philippines because he and his family were basically running because some members of the church were trying to kill him for speaking out against it.
I read about this as well. This was the big one, I think.
Yep. I think was it Edward or Eduardo Menorca? I know Menorca is his last name for sure, at least. But yeah, Menorca fled to Canada, actually had to get his case, investigated by the Canadian Immigration Bureau, who was obviously skeptical, what do you mean a church is trying to kill you? What are you talking about? Where they actually found that there was enough evidence to support what he said being true. And some things, like I said before, someone threw a grenade in his car trying to kill him and his family. Someone sent him a note with a picture of his family with a red X over his, I think it was his 2-year-old daughter with "say goodbye" written on it.
Wow.
They actually kidnapped him personally before he fled for speaking out against the church, and would not let him go until he recanted on video, saying that he made the whole thing up. So he had to flee to Canada, and then I think his family is in hiding somewhere in Asia, but he's also trying to get them to Canada right now too. So that was the big one, because now it's official that these stories that INC always tries to tell you that are just made up and that they're just lies about them, these are legitimate threats and legitimate concerns that people are maybe being killed because they're speaking out against this church.
And when a government like Canada has sufficient evidence and documentation to provide a refugee asylum or whatever it is that they're offering him, then that lends a lot of credence to these kinds of stories that are coming out.
Correct, because I mean, what does the Canadian Immigration Bureau care about this? They're a completely third party, to this whole situation. So to actually say, and they even told them in the article that the Canadian Immigration Board was skeptical of all this. So for them to even say, I don't think this is going to work, and then to find the evidence later is amazing. Well, in a very horrible way.
Right.
And then there's even a little bit, I can't remember exactly how it went down, but they wrote about how Menorca was in Canada after he fled, and that Menorca sent the reporter that talked to him about this pictures that people would send him in Canada. Remember, not the Philippines anymore. He's in Canada, of him in like a mall or a public place saying, watch your back. So that's what concerns me a little bit is, again, we would always say something along the lines of, well, yeah, they're crazy in the Philippines, but not so much here.
Would the church itself say that?
Oh no, they think, or they would claim, and they did in the article, that the whole thing is made up.
Oh, okay.
They accused Menorca of lying under oath. They accused him of basically sending himself the picture of his family with the red X over his daughter, saying that he could have done that. So what proof does that do? And that he got a friend, or it's possible that he got a friend to take a picture of him and send him threatening messages of himself to himself in Canada.
So they're basically engaging in their own little conspiracy theory.
Correct.
Conspiracy theorizing.
Correct. And the worst part is people are buying this still. I mean, Menorca is hated within INC. Even the people who know nothing about the situation, I have heard them say, oh yeah, I know about him. He's an asshole.
It's like lay members of any given mainline Christian church who may not know much about Satan, like the history of the character and the mythology and all that.
Yep.
They just know that Satan is a bad word, or they don't know much about atheists. They just know that atheist is a bad word.
Correct. They heard their ministers talk about the situation from the pulpit, and they'll eat it up. And that's it. That's all they need to know.
What is their missionary efforts like? Do they have like or what is it, if they do have missionary efforts, what does it look like? Do they go door to door? How do they like try to get outsiders to come in?
Sure. So they did try, and I don't know if other locale or other districts still do this. Maybe in other parts of the world they might, but I know they did try doing it in the United States, doing the whole door to door thing. And when they were being thought of as the Filipino Jehovah's Witnesses, they stopped that right away. So that didn't last very long. But typically what they'll do is they rely on the members themselves, like I said before, to propagate. So they'll have local evangelical missions, or LEMs, or grand evangelical missions, which are like district-wide missions held at their churches, called GEMS. And that could be anything along the lines of more of an introductory period of what the church does. You're supposed to bring in your friends, bring in people you know who may be interested in the church, which are, usually unsuspecting random friends and family. So, for example, the way I got introduced was my girlfriend, back in high school was, hey, come see me play the organ. I'm really good at it. Sure, why not? It's at church. I get it. Whoa, I'm very off put by this.
Mm-hmm.
But so that's what they mostly do. They also do a lot of stuff online. So they have various YouTube channels, things they can reach out to more younger audiences and whatnot. And if you heard the video in the Real Life Beyond Faith interview,
yes,
it gets a little weird sometimes.
Mm-hmm. And I do want to play a clip of that and give full credit to Real Life Beyond Faith for doing it first on their podcast episode, because that's the kind of thing that you have to hear it to really get a sense of how creepy their whole mission is.
Yep.
And it really drives home the fact that they have to rely primarily on indoctrination of children more so than outreach to outsiders.
Correct.
Always submit to the church administration, for their place by the God to lead the station. If we obey, then we will receive salvation. Sing along with me. Second voice. Always submit to the church administration, for their place by the God to lead the station. If we obey, then we will receive salvation. Sing along with me. Third voice. Always submit to the church administration, for their place by the God to lead the station. If we obey, then we will receive salvation. Sing along with me. Everybody. Always submit to the church administration, for they were placed by the God to lead his nation. If we obey, then we will receive salvation. Sing along with me.
Just let me comment quickly on the other stuff they do make. So they do have several shows that they try to push. They have a show called That's in the Bible. Great. Where basically they say this is why every other religion is wrong and dispelling unbiblical myths. They had a great one about, why is homosexuality bad, which they tried so hard to sidestep. We don't think they're bad people, but they just need to be shown God's love. I'm like, oh, screw you.
Kind of like the whole love the sinner, hate the sin.
Kind of. But it was just really interesting how they try to toe tap around it. They have another one called, I think it's like One-on-One, which it's just more one-on-one stories of faith and how people were brought into the church, especially non-Filipino people. They love pushing, this is so weird too, they love pushing non-Filipinos because they don't want to be a Filipino-based church. They want to show them, no, we're not a Filipino-based church, we're just a church that has the truth that happened to be started in the Philippines. And actually that's why during a lot of district-wide events, they love throwing me in front of the camera because I was the white person. I'm going to be honest, it's weird being a minority as a white person in places here. So that was a new experience for me. And then they also have a couple of shows, I think, called Face the Truth, Face the Truth Kids Edition. They have some weird, creepy show that there's like a talking lamb for kids. It's really weird. And then I'm going to be incredibly stereotypical, so I apologize. But one thing I've learned most from this church and meeting all these people is that Filipinos love to sing. So there are tons and tons of music videos, So they also have that. And it's all about glorifying the church. And the way I always describe that is, if you thought contemporary Christian music was bad, you should hear some of this stuff.
Oh, I can't even imagine. I don't know, and I don't know if I'm going to try to imagine. Yeah, it's a very again. I keep on noticing all of these ironic discrepancies and ironies of the church is very wary of the internet, yet they try to utilize it as a resource.
Yep. And then they also, what I just remembered is they just started a 24/7 live INC radio channel. It's just a YouTube live streaming channel or through whatever website they host it through. But what they do is it's nonstop coverage. They give local churches and districts an hour slot to plug whatever they want. And that they use that as a way to propagate as well. So that's their probably newest thing they just started recently, probably maybe a year ago.
Okay. I wonder how successful these kinds of things are, because it seems like the kind of thing that only members would watch. Members who spend their time on the internet, who know that they can't look too deeply into it, but who want to enjoy the benefits and luxury of the internet age. It seems like people who are already in are the ones who would be watching and exposing themselves to this kind of new media exploration of the church.
Bingo. You hit the nail right on the head. I have to go searching for a lot of this stuff, and when I do show it to people, they're like, "What the heck is this? I've never heard of any of this." So they're really doing a good job. I think I'm spreading more awareness about the church than probably half their members are at this point. So I should be given something here, you think? But no, the vast majority of it is all, I'm already a member of the church, and since I don't have a big community or a big social community outside the church, because we're not really allowed to have one, or we're just kind of bred to not have one outside the church, I'm going to pay more attention to what's happening inside.
Yeah, so what was the, going back to your personal story, what was the process of coming out of that? Was there more to it than just the impracticalities of staying with somebody who wanted to remain in the church? What was the process of questioning or doubting, and did you ever actually truly believe in what they were preaching?
Sure. So I did join to be with this relationship. However, I would be lying to say that I wasn't persuaded a little bit. When I went through my indoctrinational period, it was quite interesting how well they presented themselves, to the point where I was like, wow, this is the one church that actually makes sense and uses reason and logic. God, those other churches are stupid. And it's because they did such a great job at tearing down other faiths. I mean, seriously, it's the idea of going one God further, or going one religion further to be an atheist. They are so close, because man, do they hammer every single faith they have, to the best of their ability. So, but that's what made it so persuasive. Catholics were ridiculous because they were worshiping graven images, and the idea of priesthood was unbiblical. A lot of other Christian churches were unbiblical because of the Trinity of the doctrine, or the Trinity doctrine. So that was bad. People were celebrating Christmas and Easter because they're actually pagan holidays, and they're not actually founded within the Bible at all. So when I was hearing all that for the first time, it challenged my beliefs, and I wasn't ready for it. So I did.
It appealed to your intellectual side,
correct, or at least my curiosity side. So I did believe it for a while. There was a point where I was proud to be called a member of INC, or I was a proud member of Iglesia ni Cristo. What problems arose was when it did cause a lot of tension between me and my mother, who thought I was being brainwashed into a cult, and she wasn't necessarily wrong. My father and my parents are also divorced, so they're kind of on their own splits as well. But my father was actually studying to become a pastor of a non-denominational church at the time. So he had his own issues with the church, and also thought that they were a cult.
There's a little bit of I'm sure, tension when it comes to thinking that your family member believes that you're on the pathway to hell for being in a different church.
Correct. So, and for most of it, it wasn't too bad until I started having church take priority of family events and stuff. So that's where it really started becoming issues with my own family. But what killed me the most was when I would go to church, I would constantly be hearing about how persecution is coming from within your own family or your own circle, how my parents were being called, the workers of the devil on a consistent basis. and that they're trying to drag me down to hell, and that they're all going to burn forever, and that a lot of people that I knew who were great people deserved to be tortured for all eternity. And to me, it didn't make sense to me. So I started questioning more and more. I tried to go to my fiance's family, and they told me that my parents are all lying to me. I tried to go to my family, and they told me that my fiance's family was lying to me. I tried to go to my church, and they told me to just believe whatever the church believed. So I couldn't do it anymore. So I started reading on my own. I started finding people like Christopher Hitchens. I bought The God Delusion. I read that for the first time. Weirdly enough, I was so rebellious at that point where I actually brought The God Delusion into church. So,
Oh, nice.
yeah, I caused a little bit of uproar with that too. So maybe not the best idea, but I did it anyway. But then I found more people like Seth Andrews and Matt Dillahunty and Aaron Ra, and they really helped me get out of it as well. To the point where, all right, this doesn't make sense to me anymore. Even to the point where religion doesn't make sense to me anymore. If these ideas are so harmful, God couldn't exist. So I'm an atheist. Okay. So I do that, but now I had no one to talk to because everyone in my circle was religious one way or another. Either it was Catholic or non-denominational, or it was INC. So I just started to blog about it. I didn't expect anyone to read it, but I just had to get my thoughts down on paper or something somewhere, So I write, it was a typical secular blog. I mean, I'm sure there's, a dime a dozen out of those, but anything from evolution to God of the Gaps to Pascal's Wager. And then I wanted to do my own series about Iglesia and Cristo in here. And I wasn't shy about it either. I didn't flaunt the blog, but I didn't hide that I was writing it either. So weirdly enough, one of my ex-fiance's best friends found it. I don't know how. I don't know where he got it from, but he did. Okay, fine. And then he found my one post about Iglesia and Cristo. It wasn't even like I wrote a ton at this point. It was just one introductory post saying, hey, this church exists. I'm going to try to write about it and critique it in a civil and meaningful way. But if I'm wrong about it, let me know. Like, that's basically all I wrote about it. And this guy flipped his lid. So I actually, my ex-fiance came over one time in tears, and I had asked her what was going on, and she just throws her phone at me. And you know about those like group chats or group text chats?
Oh yeah.
Like the bane of my existence. I hate those things to death.
Mhm.
Well, since our locale in Wisconsin is only so big, I mean, there's like only probably 4 or 5 people that are in our age group. So they stuck together pretty well. And they had one of these group chats. So I read the group chat, and this best friend who was my ex-fiance's, her best friend, who was my ex-fiance's best friend for maybe like 20 some years, said that, he hates her now, that calling her, I don't know if I'm allowed to swear much.
Oh, absolutely.
Okay. Calling her a bitch, calling her a cunt, saying, how dare she bring this poison into our inner circle? She should be reprimanded. He's gonna report her to the administration, and she shouldn't be seen again for bringing this guy into our church for having such dangerous ideas.
Wow, this sounds like maybe an effective way to instill fear and guilt in everybody, because it's not just the person questioning who's standing in the church is on the line. It's your whole family will be harassed, and your
Correct.
All your friends will be harassed.
Correct. And we don't have as much time to really get into the nooks and crannies of it, but that's what this church does well. Where what INC does is, if you get excommunicated or you get your position taken away from you for whatever reason, not only does that affect you, that affects your entire family. So if you get excommunicated, your parents could get excommunicated, or they at best could lose their position and lose their standing in the church, which is a big deal to these people. So if you screw up for everyone you care about, which is, I mean, in a horribly evil way, brilliant on their part, because that keeps people, keeps their mouth shut, for lack of a better term. So, yeah, and then with this church, there's this overlaying fear of being reported to the administration, whether it's being reported for making a mistake while you're performing, whether it's wearing the wrong type of outfit in public. People have been reported for posting pictures of themselves on Facebook for having too revealing of clothing, which was ridiculous. If you go to your school dance and the administration finds out, you can get in trouble for that. So a lot of like really weird things get you in trouble in this church. So everyone's always afraid of being reported. So when my ex-fiance was accused of this was a big deal to her, because not only is she actively involved in the church, her family was heavily involved in it. Her dad's a deacon. Her mom is another choir member, which, unlike many other churches, choir members are a leadership position within the church that have a much higher standing. So, and then her brother is currently in the Philippines right now studying to become a minister. So, like, he could get affected by this as well. So, I tried to do the reasonable thing, and I reached out to the guy and I said, you know what? I saw that you saw my blog somewhere, but it's okay. You don't have to like me. I understand. I'll never talk to you. I'll keep my distance, but let's keep it okay for her sake. At least make it civil. I got a nope, fuck you. I hate you for who you are, what you are. You are a dangerous person, and I don't want anything to do with you ever again.
Wow.
And we talked some more, and it got escalated to the point where he said, because of my radical ideology, he sent out, or he claimed to send out, a nationwide wanted poster of me with my name, my picture, to every locale in the country, saying that I am a danger to those in the church, that I may end up vandalizing the church in any way, shape, or form, or I may shoot up the people inside. So I should not be allowed on the premises because I'm such a dangerous person with my radical ideology. And I say claimed because I actually never saw the wanted poster go like, coast to coast personally.
Mm-hmm.
But I do know for a fact he did spread it within, probably maybe 6 or 7 states within our district. So it was that I can for sure know what happened. So it was pretty swift after that. I was called in right away. Say, hey, what's going on? You're going to shoot up our church. I don't like this. So I tried to explain myself. I tried to tell our minister that this guy is actively lying about me, about who I am, and that I am not a dangerous person in the slightest. Didn't matter to them at all. Simply because I spoke out against the church publicly, it was enough for me to say there was damage done, and I had to be excommunicated.
So that was that? You were out?
It took a little while. So weirdly enough, with a lot of people who do get excommunicated from this church, it doesn't happen right away because they're so bureaucratic. Right. So there are times where people will get expelled from the church, and then it'll take like 4 months for them to actually be kicked out of church. And then there are times where people will get expelled from the church, end up going to a different locale, and then just continue to go there until they end up like being reinstated. So I don't understand the logic behind it. I think it's one of those things where it's like, this action was so bad that you have to get out of our sites right now. But if you continue to give us money in a different area and you promise not to cause trouble, then we'll let you stay. It's really weird.
Interesting. Yeah, it's kind of interesting to me, the path that people take from religious belief of any kind to free thinking or atheism or secular humanism. And I love deconversion stories of all kinds. And I think with somebody who's in an exclusivist system like that, it's easier people such as you, it's easier for them to see the value in questioning all religion and all gods, whereas somebody who comes from a more watered down, more modern, mainstream denomination, they might have a more difficult time seeing the value in questioning all religion altogether, and they might start looking at other religions. They might do like a lateral conversion to a different religion or a different denomination.
Mm-hmm.
So there's with somebody who's entrenched within a cult-like belief system, there's either the potential for them to continue on that path and follow it to its logical conclusion their whole life, or to question that and to all of a sudden, without the blinders on, see that all religion is essentially bullshit, and that if you take bullshit to its logical extreme, you get things like, we're the only true church and you have to accept everything we say.
Mm-hmm. And actually, what's unfortunate is the extremity of Iglesia ni Cristo becomes almost like a little bit of a crutch, because when I talk to someone who's more mainstream, I'll say, well, this is my story, this is what happened, and because of that, I looked into religion a lot more, and now I'm an atheist. Their first thought is, oh, well, you didn't deal with a real Christian church, the idea of the no true Scotsman. And I get that all the time now, because I would always have people saying, especially my own father, well, if you learned real Christianity, you would still be a Christian. So, but you are 100% right. It's when people don't see how harmful ideas can be when it's this authoritarian of an environment or this dogmatic of an environment. So, just talking about, crazy dogmaticism, when I came out to my ex-fiance's family about not being a part of the church anymore, it was like a light switch to them, because I went from being literally a blessing to their daughter, saying that, she was the luckiest woman in the world to have such a great person in her life, to, oh, he must have been trying to deceive her, take her away from us. And
instantaneously.
Where I had to tell them, yeah, I'm just, not even that I was an atheist yet. I didn't even get that far. It was, I just don't think I can agree with this church. Like, and I put it as nicely as I could. It's like, you can still do it, that's okay, but I just don't think this is for me. And
I recall you talking about being accused of being a Catholic spy.
Yeah. So, well, and I'll get there in a second. So, right after I told him I couldn't be in the church anymore, my ex-fiance's dad went, well, it was nice knowing you, Joe, and proceeded to kick me out of the house. I give credit to, my ex, where she tried. We're still good friends, and she tried so hard to stick up for me to her parents, who she is afraid of and afraid of letting down. Because, like I said, they're both very actively involved in the church. Her brother is becoming a minister, and she was about to marry an atheist. So she already felt like she was the black sheep of the family. And when she tried to stand up to her parents, they kicked her out as well, because, how dare you disobey us for an atheist? So, I respect her decision, where we unfortunately had to break it off, because, she had to choose between her family or me. If she decided to try to marry me outside the church, her family would straight up disown her, and she would not see her family again. So I have to respect that decision. I'm never going to hold that against her. But yeah, like you said, one night after that first encounter where I was kicked out of the house, I get a call from my ex, and I could hear her crying into the phone and her dad screaming in the background. And she's just like in tears saying, Joe, you have to talk to him. He is going out of his mind. You have to talk to him. You have to right now. And I'm like, what is going on? I wasn't planning on talking to you today. So what's happening? And I hear in the distance, is that Joe? Put him on the phone. Put him on the phone right now. I need to talk to him. Okay, fine. So I'm on speakerphone. I just yell, "What?" And he comes right up to the phone. He's like, "Joe, you need to tell me right now. Are you or are you not a spy for the Catholic Church?"
Awesome.
And I'm like, "What?" And he repeats it. Like, "Are you a spy for the Catholic Church?" And I said, "Oh, I wanted to say something so much worse, but I said, no." I said, "They're just as wrong as you are." He didn't like that either, but I said, "I'm an atheist." That's not what an atheist is. But to them, atheists don't exist. Either you are with this church or you're a believer in God who is trying to take the church down one way or another. And
that's really interesting.
Oh yeah, and these people, not so much with the younger generations, because obviously the younger generations are being much more inclusive, just overall. But yeah, like I've had to call people out, like probably in the 40s to 70s range of people in this church, that they would say on a constant basis, "Oh yeah, everyone outside the church is wicked and evil. Everyone outside the church is doped up on drugs all the time, or they're just off having sex, with sluts and hookers, and while they have a needle sticking out of their arm." That's like a constant characterization they have of people outside of their church.
But nobody's truly an atheist. Is their line?
Correct, because they just obviously want to sin, because they want to hold on to their false beliefs.
Because the very existence of people who question the very concept and idea of God is threatening to certain religious mindsets.
Well, and actually, what one of my friends did is, so I'm actually working with some people right now where I'm trying to write, and I'm in very early stages, so this is nothing right now, but I'm going to try to end up writing a book basically refuting the doctrine of Iglesia and Cristo. And when we were talking about how they believe there is no such thing as an atheist, he actually described it very well, where he said it comes from a very Philippine-centric worldview. Because like I said, in the Philippines, I think it's like 90 to 95 of them are super religious. And the vast majority of them are Catholic, followed by, I think, Muslims, and then INC specifically. So the idea of even atheists in the Philippines just isn't much of a thing. That's why where I think the Atheist Republic in the Philippines has its own chapter, and there's also like Philippine Atheism, which is an online group as well, are so crucial in that area, because the awareness of even saying, "Well, I don't think God exists," isn't even on the table for most people. So, so I think that's where a lot of this dogma comes from as well.
Right. And in kind of wrapping up, feel free to share what you're doing today and currently for like activism wise in the kind of secular humanism, atheism circles that you run in.
Sure. So in good timing too. So I'm actually the president and founder, if that's what I should even be called, I have no idea, of Milwaukee Humanists. And we just put on our big conference, the Brew City Benefit, where we brought in Aaron Raw, Lalandra Raw, Seth Andrews, Callie Wright, Thomas Smith, Alex Jules, and Jason Love, and Dan Barker and Annie Laura Gaylor. And we raised money for the Rape, Abuse, and Incest National Network. So it was really cool. It was an amazing time. We're still trying to get the totals that we raised that we can donate to RAIN as a group all figured out. But, we were very happy with how the event turned out. It was a very positive event. And we could not be happier that, good things like this can come out of the city of Milwaukee. So I do that typically. Actually, we do have our Milwaukee Humanist Social tomorrow as well. So if you happen to be in the area, it's really awesome. I highly recommend checking it out. And then I also work with Milwaukee Atheists on the side every now and then, where we used to do like a podcast here and there as well. So yeah, that's what I do now.
Great. Well, any parting words you want to leave with listeners about anything? I like to end these with like opening the floor for you to say anything you want in closing.
Sure. Um, I think, like Nathan, I'm very interested in deconversion stories, especially weird ones like mine. I highly recommend looking into stories from, I think mine's interesting as well, but others, including ex-Mormons, Jehovah's Witnesses, and just a lot of really weird sects out there, because it it does a great job of putting things into perspective of how dangerous bad ideas can be and how important it is for us to have a good, solid education system in this country and if not worldwide. So I recommend doing that for your listeners.
Yeah, and on that note, in addition to recommending your book, Ask an Atheist, I would also recommend a massive 700-page book that an acquaintance of mine wrote by the name of Edwin Suominen, and he came out of an exclusivist cult-like Christian sect called conservative Lestadianism, and that is an offshoot of Lutheranism. And he wrote a book called An Examination of the Pearl that he self-published, and it's just a massive volume where he goes through every single facet imaginable of this church and its history and its doctrine, all based on the research that he himself did while within the church. So it's stories like that and stories like yours where he actually has in his introduction a section on the Iglesia ni Cristo and talks about how you can take out the names and substitute INC or Lestadianism and within like their doctrinal statements, and it would be accurate both ways because both churches have the like identical exclusive doctrine of ours is the only true church.
Yep.
So I would recommend that on the note of looking into like weird sects that nobody has ever heard of or very few people have heard of. So thank you very much for joining me on this episode.
Thank you so much. It was a pleasure is all mine.
Thank you for listening to A Leap of Doubt. If you liked what you heard, please consider leaving a review on iTunes. If you want to get involved in the kinds of discussions this show is meant to encourage, you can find a discussion group on Facebook at facebook.com/groups/ALOP discussion. You can follow me and get in touch with me on Twitter, where my username is @thenatheist. Feedback and criticisms are always welcome. The opening clip is an excerpt from the audiobook God is Not Great by Christopher Hitchens, courtesy of Hachette Audio. Text copyright 2007 by Christopher Hitchens. Audio production copyright 2007 Hachette Audio. Used with permission. The music is Jade by Esther Nicholson and is used under license. I'd like to take this moment to give a very special shout out to my 4 patrons, Jeff Prebeg, Jeannie Eichard, Torsten Pill, and Chris Watson. If you enjoy the work I do, please consider becoming a patron on Patreon at patreon.com/aleapofdoubt.